Thank you for joining us today. My name is Allison McKay, and I'm an attorney with Disability Rights Ohio. And today we will be providing a second of what will hopefully be a series of Facebook Live videos that provide an overview of how Disability Rights Ohio advocates for children with disabilities. Today we will discuss our popular negotiation skills for parents booklet, which is available on our website. And if you have ideas for other topics that you would like us to discuss in the future, please let us know. If you would like to follow along with our video, we have posted a copy of our PowerPoint on our website. And I believe we will include a link to our website in the comments page of the feed. And captioning of this video will also be available within the next business day. Please know that Disability Rights Ohio is providing this video as an informational resource. We are not providing legal advice. If you seek help regarding a specific situation, please contact our intake department. Also, please feel free to comment and ask questions throughout this video, and we will do our best to respond. If for some reason we don't get to your question in time, we will try to respond afterward. We do ask that you not disclose confidential information in the comments section on Facebook, such as your child's name. Again, if you're seeking help regarding a specific situation, please contact our intake department directly. So for more information on Disability Rights Ohio, you can access our previous Facebook Live presentation, which is available on our Facebook page and on YouTube. But just as a little background, Disability Rights Ohio is a nonprofit corporation. We are Ohio's designated protection and advocacy system and client assistance program for people with disabilities in Ohio. And our mission is to advocate for the legal, civil, and human rights of people with disabilities in Ohio. So if a person with disabilities needs our help, they are welcome to contact our intake department. Our phone number is 1-800-282-9181 and press option 2 to access intake. You can also use our online intake form, which is available on our website at www.disabilityrightsohio.org. So let me introduce you to our presenters today. First, we have John Price, who you will see in a minute. He has been with Disability Rights Ohio for over 3 years and is a member of our education team. And he has helped numerous families over the years navigate the special education process. And also with Disability Rights Ohio for over 30 years and manages our special education work at Disability Rights Ohio. And again, I'm Allison McKay. I'm an attorney here at Disability Rights Ohio and have been with the office for over 7 years. And I coordinate our client assistance program and our Medicaid pro bono program. So I will now hand it over to Kristen Hildebrand.
Thank you, Allison. Today we're going to talk about a publication of our office called Negotiation Skills for Parents. How do you get the special education services your child needs? This publication really guides you as a parent through advocacy steps in accessing special education services for your child. It's a pretty detailed book, and we're not going to be able to talk about everything in the book today. We're just going to try to highlight some of the major topics in the book and things you should know when you're looking to negotiate with your school district. I encourage you to get on our website and download the book or read the book, maybe print it off for yourself, and use some of the techniques that we're not going to be able to talk about today in your communications with your school district. Today we're really going to focus on what do you need to do to get prepared for the process of negotiation. We're going to focus on effective communication, including who you should talk to and how you should communicate with that person. We're going to give you tips and tricks for getting good results at meetings with your school district, including IEP meetings and other meetings that you might be in the special education process. We're going to highlight some ways that you can identify barriers to your success, including specific barriers to your team and how it functions, and barriers to getting the services that you need. We're also going to give you ways in which you can respond to problems that come up during the process, maybe problems that you don't know about, but just come up during your IEP meeting, and how do you respond appropriately to those. And if you're unable to get what you want through the information and advice in this booklet, we'll give you some information about more formal remedies that would be available to you in the special education process.
So as Krista mentioned, we want to really give you some information on how you can prepare for really any part of being in the special education process, whether it's a meeting, whether you're planning on just starting the process with writing a letter, or even preparing for something as simple as a phone call to the school district. Because being prepared is really one of the most important things that a parent can do in order to set themselves up for success in the education process. We see over and over again that prepared parents are much more likely to get what they want from the school district. And what being prepared means can look different depending on the situation, but at the very least, you want to have a very clear idea about what the problem is that you're seeking to address. You want to know the key underlying facts and any sort of relevant, you want to be familiar with any sort of relevant documents that are going to be at issue. And you want to have, more than anything, a very clear idea about what you're asking the school district for, which in some situations is really straightforward. If you have a really clear idea about what service or placement that you're wanting, that can be really obvious. But in other situations, you may not know right off the bat what the solution to your problem might be. And an important part of you getting ready for the meeting is to really do your homework and do the research so that you can know what you're asking for. So as we go through this presentation, we're going to talk about, kind of 4 broad steps in order to prepare to negotiate in any of those sort of processes. We were going to talk a little bit about identifying what the specific problem is that you're addressing, identifying a possible resolution or what you as a parent want out of the process or things that your child needs. And we're going to talk about communication and figuring out who the right person within the school district that you need to be dealing with is. And we are also going to talk about, related to that, determining who it is that has the information that you're seeking.
The first step in beginning this process is for you to clearly define what the problem is. And it's best for you to define that problem from a variety of perspectives. This slide talks to you about looking at the problem from the perspective of both sides, but really in special education, you have 3 sides that you want to consider. What do you as a parent think the problem is? What does the school district think the problem is? And what does your child think the problem is? Because in many cases, particularly when children get older, their participation and buy-in into the resolution to the problem is critical to success. So if a student agrees with the solution, they're much more likely to participate in it and affect some change to the situation. So you need to spend some time figuring out what do those various perspectives think the problem is. And it's usually different depending on which side you're talking about. You're also going to want to try to be prepared with suggested solutions to your problem. And you need to think also in terms of what kinds of solutions would be acceptable to the parties involved, right? So the more likely it is that your proposed solution is doable in a school setting, the more likely it is that you're going to get a positive resolution to your problem. And certainly it's always better, especially for the continued positive functioning of the IEP team and the people who are wrapped around your child, that you can reach some kind of consensus about what the solution might be.
So as I mentioned earlier, in addition to identifying the problem and resolution, a key part of negotiating effectively is figuring out who the person is that you need to talk to. And really, when you're thinking about that, there's kind of three things that you want to consider. You want to consider figuring out who has the authority to affect the change that you're after. You also want to think about who you have the best relationship with in the school district, and depending on your situation, it could be your child's teacher, it could be a counselor, or someone else. But you are, as in any other sort of situation, you're much more likely to get a positive result with someone who you have a positive relationship with. And you also want to make sure that whoever you're communicating with in the school district is responsive to your requests. So if you're finding that there is a member of the team who's not responding to emails or answering phone calls or returning phone calls, then that might not be the person that you want to be your key point of contact. One of the key parts of figuring out who that person is figuring out what exactly the nature of the problem is. And the next slide kind of talks about four key people within the school district and the situations in which you might want to contact them. So if the problem that you are having with the district is really classroom based, so if it has to do with the accommodations that your child is getting in the classroom, such as getting extra time on assignments or preferential seating or something of that nature, and that's not going correctly, the first and most natural person that you would want to contact is your child's teacher. For more serious building-wide concerns that might have to do with disciplinary issues or scheduling or figuring out what sorts of classrooms are available within that school building, the school building principal might actually be the person that has that information, and in those situations, that might be the person that you would contact. The next person on the list is the special education administrator, and those individuals tend to have different titles depending on the school district that you're in. They're often called the special education director or special services administrator, we see sometimes, but this is the person who oversees all the special education services within the school district as a whole. So this is the person who knows what services are available in the district as far as classrooms and programming, and this is a person who has the authority to commit those resources. So in any sort of situation to where you're talking about major changes or additional services that your child might need in the IEP, this is the person who you're going to want to communicate with during the course of your negotiations. The last individual that we have mentioned is the superintendent. And this is, of course, the ultimate decision maker within any school district. If you are really early on in the negotiation process, it's going to be unlikely that the superintendent has much detailed information about what's going on with your child from day to day, because they're overseeing literally every department, every school building in the district. But if your negotiation or any sort of dispute resolution proceeds to a high level, this is going to be one of the people that is going to be involved. So you just want to know when it's going to be appropriate to include them.
A key component to effective communication throughout this process is, as John just said, identifying the person who can resolve your dispute at the lowest possible level. So throughout your advocacy for your child, in the special education process, you always want to keep that in mind, is that you want to go to that person who can resolve your dispute as quickly as possible in the most collaborative and in the most collaborative way. If you don't get your issue resolved at that level, you can always work your way up the chain of command to try to get your issue resolved. But again, because special education is such a collaborative process and every decision is made by a team, you want to communicate in a way that keeps that team functioning in a positive way and moving forward. Another thing that you should do is ask people how they prefer to communicate. So there are a variety of different ways to communicate these days. Some people prefer to communicate via email. Some people prefer to talk in person. Some people prefer to talk over the phone. But you always get better results when you ask the person you're communicating with what their preference is and follow that preference. You also should consider establishing a regular way of communicating with people that are involved in your child's education. We always encourage parents to use some kind of device that works for them, where they can keep contemporaneous track of the discussions they've had with the school district or things that are going on in their child's life. Sometimes we tell parents they should just get a wall calendar, and in a situation where there's repeated communication with the school district, that's a great way to document on the day on the calendar what communication happened. Maybe the school called you, you can say what time the call came in, who called you, and what the topic of the discussion was. That's also a great way to keep track if your child is a child who's having some behavioral issues in school, who is being suspended or removed from school on a regular basis, and you need to keep track of how many days. That's a great way to do that, is just to write that on a wall calendar. Another way to do regular communication is just to keep a notebook of what kind of communication you have with the school. And in that notebook, you can also keep copies of papers and other things that come to you through the mail from the school district. You also want to think about, in terms of ways of communicating with people, whether personal contact is how you should handle the situation. But you need to know when, in your particular situation, that would be effective or not. Personal communication is great because it helps you to establish rapport with a person, because you go and you talk to them in person. It's also great because it allows you to gauge that person's reaction to your communication and your communication style. So for example, when you're in an IEP meeting, you can gauge the body language of the other people in the meeting, whether people are looking at their watches, whether they appear to be paying attention, those kinds of things. And having that kind of information is helpful to you in understanding how your communication is being perceived by that person, and whether or not it's effective or not. But there are times when you can't do that. You just can't pick up and go to the school. So maybe you need to talk to people in other ways. Telephone communication can be effective, especially if you've got an issue that's really simple to resolve. And it's useful if your time is limited. If you do communicate via telephone, though, you want to make sure that you document the discussion some way by using a wall calendar or a notebook or some other way that works for you. There are some situations, though, where written communication is really important, and that's in cases where you're asking for the school district to do something specific for you, either change your child's educational services or put something in place that's not in place. The reason why that's important is because you want to be able to document that you've made the request, and so you can establish the timeline of those discussions. So for things like that, make sure you put it in writing. Make sure you put a date on the letter, because if there's no date, obviously it's difficult for you to establish whether a school district has responded to you in a timely fashion. Written communication also makes it more likely that the school district will respond to you, because people perceive that as being more formal and needing a formal response. If you're not comfortable drafting your own letters, or you just need a little bit of help in trying to figure out what a letter to a district might look like, we have a nice series of sample letters on our website in our Self-Advocacy Resource Center under topic of special education. So there's letters that will help you request an evaluation, request an IEP meeting, and other kinds of things that happen frequently in the special education process. You also want to document all your communication. So in addition to the wall calendar or keeping a notebook, make sure you keep a copy of everything that you have sent to the school district and received from the school district in a central location. And obviously the more organized you can be with that, the better, so that you can retrieve important documents when you need them. Make sure that when you communicate with the school district, you don't do it when you're angry. You need to take time to cool off before any kind of communication with the school district, whether it's in person or in writing, because as I've said numerous times, special education is a collaborative team process, and you want to approach this in the most positive way that you can, and communicating when you're angry often results in communications that are not positive. The other reason why you don't want to document an angry request or response is because it can be used against you in the future. So if you are not able to resolve your dispute at the lowest possible level and you choose to use some kind of remedy available to you, anything that you've put in writing can be used by the school district in that process. And angry letters or angry communication doesn't look good to the person who's making a decision in the case.
So I've talked kind of throughout this presentation about the importance of preparation and being prepared, but I want to take a few minutes to talk specifically about preparing for what might be the scariest part of the process for parents, and that's the actual IEP meeting or any sort of meeting with the school. And in that, as in anything else, you're really doing your homework and preparing in advance. It's going to be the best way to alleviate your anxiety and make sure that the meeting goes as well as it possibly could. And so I kind of want to just talk a little bit about some of the things that you want to prepare for and know going into the meeting so that you can, feel confident once you're there. At the very minimum, the things that you want to know are, you want to know the strength of your position, which can be kind of difficult in some situations, but you want to know, basically, how strong the law and the facts support what you're asking for. And related to that, you want to understand what the law and the legal standards are. You want to know what it is that you want, and I mentioned some of that earlier, and you want to know the strength of your team and the kinds of expertise that the different people on the team are bringing to the table. And you also want to be prepared to think outside the box. So I always tell parents that, it is important to know what you want, but don't go into a meeting so focused and so committed to your position that you're not open to thinking about different ideas. So knowing the strength of your position, the ways that you can prepare for that are really utilizing the experts that exist in your child's life. So for instance, if your child is a child with autism and receives either some sort of behavioral service or ABA from an outside or clinical provider, that is a really good person that you could use to evaluate the strength of what you're asking for. So if that person is using some service or program with your child that's very effective in the home, that's going to be really useful information for the IEP team to have, especially if what they are recommending supports what you're asking for. And you want to have that person participate in the IEP meetings if at all possible. Sometimes that's not always possible for many reasons, including scheduling, or it might not be that person's personal preference to get involved in a dispute with the school district. But have them participate to the maximum extent that they can. So if they can't actually be physically present at the meeting, see if they can participate by phone. If they can't do that, at the very minimum, try to have them write a letter or just something so that you can share their perspective with the IEP team when you're there. Another possible way to get that expert perspective, if you don't already have it built in, is to seek an expert at the school district's expense. There is a process in special education called the Independent Educational Evaluation Process, or you'll normally hear it referred to as an IEE. And that is available to you as a parent at any time when you disagree with an evaluation that the school district has done on your child. You also want to know the legal standards that apply to the case. Special education operates on very different legal standards than other sort of related systems. So everything in special education is built around the concept of providing a child with a free, appropriate public education. And there are many, many, many court decisions and other decisions that kind of define what that means. But what you want to make sure that anything that you're asking for is couched in the language of asking for services that will give your child a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. Special education is not a system that works on what you call the best interests of your child. It is a system that's based around what's necessary in order to provide your child with an appropriate education. So if you make a request to a school district and you make the request in terms of what's in your child's best interest, you are not actually making the argument that that is required for a free appropriate public education. So the claim that you would have against the school district is not nearly as strong. So you want to make sure that anytime you are requesting something specific that you're using that language. I mentioned this a little earlier, but you also want to have a very specific idea of what it is that you want. You want to determine this to the maximum extent that you can before the meeting. I mean, there are going to be situations where you don't know about a specific option that might be great for your child until you actually get into the meeting. But to the extent that you can, you want to know what you're after before the meeting, and even draft a proposal to share with the team in advance if you can, so that you can, the more that you are able to let the district do the legwork ahead of time, the more progress that you're going to make when you're in the meeting. You also want to know, particularly if you have a very complex dispute with the school district where there are multiple things that are at issue, you want to know what are your deal breakers and what are the things that you can compromise on. So if you have a list of 8 or 9 objectives or things that you say that you want, you might want to, before the meeting, go through and figure out what the most important things are. Maybe a list of 3 to 5 like must-haves, and the other things you might be able to compromise on. And you want to be prepared to support your request with research, expert support, and legal support. Going into the meeting, you want to definitely understand what the purpose of the meeting is. You should be receiving a parent invitation to any sort of IEP meeting with the school district that clearly states what the things that you're going to be discussing are. And why this is really important is you want to make sure that the appropriate people are present at the IEP meeting. There are certain members of the IEP meeting, including the parent, some district representative, the special education teacher, and the regular education teacher that are required members at all IEP meetings. But you want to make sure, particularly if you are discussing something that has to do with, like maybe that speech is going to be an issue at the IEP meeting, you want to make sure that the district is going to make sure that the speech person is available. And you want to make sure that you have your own personal team who can talk about the issues that you want to talk about. You also want to request a notice from the school in writing about its position on your request. So if you go to an IEP meeting and you make a specific request for something, like maybe there's a specific placement that you want or a specific service, even if the district is declining that request, you want to make sure that they are responding to that request in writing so that you have a document of what their position is on that specific issue. So if they're saying no, you want to know why in writing they are saying no. And sometimes they might not do that without you insisting on it. Also, going into the IEP meeting, you want to create for yourself an outline or an agenda, or at least bullet points of what it is that you want to get out of that meeting. In some situations, you might want to share that with the school district so that everyone knows what it is that you want to talk about, particularly if you are the one who has requested the IEP meeting. But the important thing is you want to be able to, while you're at the meeting, you want to stay on track with your outline so that you can make sure that you don't forget anything, or that this discussion doesn't go so far off track that you don't talk about the important things that you want to talk about. Also, when you're actually physically present at the IEP meeting, you want to make sure that you're focusing on current issues and not the past. And I know that this can be really, really difficult for parents to do, especially when you're upset about something that may have happened at a previous IEP meeting or something that they've done to your child in the past. But the IEP process is very much focused on what's going on in the present and what will be going on in the future. And so you should really be spending all of your time in the IEP meeting talking about these current issues, and you should only bring up past issues if they relate directly to what you're talking about. You also want to make sure that you're staying calm during the IEP process, which is sometimes easier said than done, because if you've been in a contentious IEP meeting, you know that it can be hard. But staying calm has multiple benefits. Most of all, it allows you to think clearly. I know if you kind of think about situations in your life when you've made decisions when you're angry or really upset, those sometimes don't turn out to be the best decisions. And it's just important to make sure that you're staying calm. And if that is proving to be impossible for you in the moment for whatever reason, there are multiple things you can do. You can request a break. You can go outside, take a walk, get a drink of water, do whatever you need to do. Or if you're spent for the day and there's just no way you're going to be able to get refocused, you can request that the IEP meeting reconvene at a different time. And then you also want to make sure that you're documenting any agreements or changes that you've agreed to in the IEP meeting. You should not rely just on the school to document those changes. You should be sending letters just so it's clear in your child's record your position on what it is that you've agreed to. And then after the IEP meeting, you want to make sure that the IEP reflects any agreements or changes that you've agreed to. So in many situations, that will happen while you're actually there at the IEP meeting. Sometimes someone from the district will actually do the amendments then and print them out and bring it to you for your signature. If you review the document and you're very clear that it reflects all the changes that you've agreed to, it is okay to go ahead and sign in the moment. But in many situations, you might want to take that document home and review it and maybe talk with your spouse or a family friend or even an attorney or advocate that you might be working with, just to make sure that everything that you've agreed to is reflected in the document before you sign it. You also want to make sure you're sticking to the pleasantries, even if that's just as simple as thanking people for being at the IEP meeting. Those little things can go a long way, and in many situations, these are going to be people who you're working with for a long period of time, and you just want to make sure that you're expressing, some amount of gratitude for the time that they are spending on your child. And you also want to follow up periodically to make sure that there's follow through on what you've requested. So you probably know that the IEP has to be amended at least once a year. But you should not only be having these IEP conversations once a year. It's really important, particularly if there are specific changes that you've made, that you're following up with whoever that responsible person is, to see that they are actually doing what they said that they were going to do. And you also want to make sure that your child is responding effectively to whatever changes that were made. You don't want to wait an entire year for the next annual review to figure out that the thing that you've agreed to or some goal or service in your child's IEP is not effective. So it's just really important that you're following up to make sure that things are going the way that they're supposed to.
Sometimes you can be very prepared for an IEP meeting, but an issue will come up that you don't expect. So this booklet contains information about some of the issues that we see coming up, some of the things that we see coming up in IEP meetings frequently, and ways that you might be able to address that in a section called Troubleshooting. One of your jobs as a parent in this process is to try to keep the focus on your child throughout this IEP meeting or other school meeting, but there are things that can interfere with that. And those are things like somebody wants to record the IEP meeting and all the parties weren't prepared for that. That's an issue that comes up in IEP meetings and might come up for you. The law is not very clear on a parent's right to record an IEP meeting unless the parent needs it for an accommodation. So if you are a parent with a disability such as an auditory processing disability or another disability where you might need a recording to effectively participate, you can ask the school district for that accommodation and they will need to provide that. But if you just want to record it because your spouse can't attend the meeting and you want them to be able to hear what's happening, the law is not clear on that. But be prepared for that issue to come up for if you want to record that there might be some pushback and you'll need to be prepared to figure out a way to resolve that amicably. Sometimes team members engage in a process where they compare your child to other children in the classroom. This comes up a lot in situations where children have behavioral difficulties in the classroom setting, or sometimes the school district feels that what's good for one child with autism is good for all children with autism, and those are the kind of discussions that occur in meetings where the district might propose a particular methodology or program for your child, reading program, for example, because they think it's good for all kids with the same kind of disabilities. Your job, in addition to keeping the focus on your child, is to remind people that this process is supposed to take into account the individual needs of every child and that every child is different. So you'll want to be prepared to address that issue if it comes up. Another issue that can affect the positive functioning of an IEP meeting is the lack of time to get the issues resolved. Some school districts will schedule an hour for every IEP meeting that they hold. The law requires the school to provide as much time as is necessary to resolve the issues being discussed. So you can handle it one of two ways. You can try to work with the school district ahead of time to get a longer IEP meeting, particularly if you have a lot of issues that you need to discuss or there are complex issues. Or if that's not possible, then you can ask the school district to hold a series of IEP meetings to give the team the time it needs to get all of the issues resolved. Sometimes budget issues will come up where the school district might say we don't have the money for that. What you need to know as a parent is that budgetary concerns are never an appropriate defense to a school district providing a service to a child. The only time that the cost of a service comes into play is when a school district is considering two comparable services for a particular child. An example might be a child who needs assistive technology, like a voice output communication device. There might be two devices that do the same thing, and one is cheaper than the other, but they're both equally effective for the child. In that case, the school district can use the cheaper device. But that's the only time really that the team is allowed to consider the cost of providing a service to your child. Another issue that comes up might be a meeting location. So the meetings are supposed to be held in a mutually agreeable place that's convenient for everybody involved. And typically it happens at the child's school district, but in the child's school building. But there are times where the child is going to school is the issue, right? So if a parent wants a child to remain in school A and the school wants the child to be in school B, it's probably not a good idea to hold the meeting in school B, because that's going to start the meeting off on a bad tone. So if you are concerned as a parent about the location of the meeting because it's a place where you feel uncomfortable, that's something that you should address with the school beforehand if possible. If you don't know about it until the actual day of the meeting, you can consider telling the school that you're very uncomfortable with the location and you'd like to reschedule the meeting to a time and place that is that you prefer. And finally, sometimes there might be attorneys involved in the IEP meeting. The special education process is supposed to be a process that parents can easily access on their own, but there are times when attorneys get involved in the process. And if you attend the meeting and an attorney is there and you didn't know that they were coming, you have a couple options. One is that you can continue with the meeting and not make any decisions and just listen to what the school district has to say and then consult your own attorney if you wish. Or you can ask the school district to reschedule the meeting and tell them you didn't know an attorney was coming, decide whether or not you want to get your own attorney and handle the meeting that way. And finally, you need to know that if the tips and techniques that we've talked to you about today and the other ones that are in this publication don't work for you and you're not able to resolve your dispute at the lowest possible level, there are some more formal remedies available to you in the special education process. You need to know what those are, and a good place to find those remedies is on the Ohio Department of Education's website. They have very good documents that explain the process and help you access those procedures that are available to you. They range from assistance through mediation, where the Department of Education will send a trained mediator to you and the school district, and that person's job is to try to help the parties reach an agreement through the education process. They have facilitated IEP meetings where the department will send somebody to help facilitate the IEP meeting and help the parties communicate in a positive way, all the way to filing a formal complaint with the state where the Department of Education will investigate your concerns and try to help create a remedy, to actually going through what's called an impartial due process hearing, which is very much like a regular court hearing where an impartial person decides the case either for you or for the school district. So it's good for you to brush up on what those options are and know when using those options might be something that you need to do.
So we did have one question.
Okay.
How do I get my child an aid for preschool?
Okay, so getting any kind of individual service like that for a child starts with asking the school district for an IEP meeting. IEP meetings are where those kinds of decisions are made, but as we've talked to you today about being prepared, there are some steps that you can take to prepare to have a successful outcome at that IEP meeting. And the first one is figuring out if you have any kind of information or evaluations that suggest that your child needs to have an individual aid. In special education, the school district will only provide the services that your child needs in order to be successful in school. Some children need one-on-one assistance and some don't. And quite frankly, school districts don't like to provide those kinds of services because they want kids to be as independent as possible. And we all do, actually. So what you need to do is request an IEP meeting, but you also need to do some preparation in the background where you talk to people who are involved in your child's life to see if they can make recommendations that an aid or a one-on-one is necessary. People who could do that might be a psychologist if your child's involved with a psychologist. If your child needs an aid for physical reasons, maybe an occupational therapist or a physical therapist. If your child needs an aid because they have significant communication issues, a speech therapist might be somebody that you talk to. But if you can, arm yourself with information that you can present to the school district to make it more likely that they will agree that that service is necessary.
All right, thank you. I think that ends our session today. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed.